The following is an Operation Podcast production.
Sexuality in and of itself is such a loaded topic, regardless of what your experience is, especially for women. We have such a complicated relationship with our sexuality societally. I'm not even just talking about like society here in the US. I'm talking about society globally, culturally. And it's woven into the fabric of how people live their lives, how they see themselves, how they are allowed to, in terms of what they internalize and embody, how they are allowed to express or own or experience their sexuality. So
it was a bit of a shock. And I want to be very clear about this because in no way, shape, or form has my work in myself and with energy, and it hasn't taken away life's challenges, but it has taken away suffering.
Are you ready for a wild ride? I'm Alexis Artin, and I invite you to strap in because this is more than a podcast. This is Look at Me Now.
Hey, y'all. We are back with another episode of Look at Me Now. And I got a real treat for you because today we are sitting down with Ivana Maria, and she is something special because she's a trust architect. Let me repeat that. She is a trust architect and also really a master storyteller. And that shows up in a myriad of ways. And we'll get into all of that. But let me welcome her. Hello. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I'm really excited.
I'm really excited because when I heard and saw in my research, trust architect, I got real excited. I got real excited because I was like, I mean, tell me all the things about this. Like, how does one become a trust architect? But before we even get into that, I would love for our listeners to meet you in the way that we meet people on this particular podcast, which is, we look back at the beginnings, right? We look back at, in terms of storytelling, right? What is the introduction to your story? Can you tell us where you came from? Can you tell us who you were as a little one that had you become a trust architect in the end?
Yeah, thank you. It's also such a beautiful opportunity to reflect. So I'm from Mexico City originally. I was actually born in California, but then I grew up in Mexico City up until about 15. And then I went to school abroad and college abroad. And then I came to LA and I haven't really lived in Mexico since. But I grew up, the youngest of 5 kids.
Okay.
A very active house. My family, every single person in my family has a very big personality. There's no one who's like just normal and quiet. And so it was always a lot of things going on. We're also very, very close, incredibly close. But growing up in Mexico City, especially in the bubble that I grew up in, was great in many ways, very comfortable, but also very deceiving. It is, not a lot of people know this, but Mexico City does have a bubble. Which, growing up there, I didn't know much more. And so I thought this was the world and this is how the world works. And I was always very much like taken care of and people taking care of me and in that sort of culture. And so when I moved away and when I went to school abroad for the first time and had this sort of first experience of being in the world alone, and I was in Europe at 15, it was a bit of a shock, and I definitely life gave me some shakes and slaps, and I started to realize that life wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't this bubble that I grew up in, that there were so many different ways of seeing life, of seeing things, of having relationships, of perspectives on things like sexuality and cultures and family values, and there was just so much more.
Can you give me an example of like are we saying that this bubble felt like a protective bubble?
Yeah.
It felt like a bubble that had limitations on you, like exploring your sexuality. Can you give me some?
Yeah, it's very interesting because
Want to know what happens when you treat hydration like a suggestion? Because the answer isn't just feeling a little tired or having dry skin. It can lead to some real health nightmares if left unchecked. Take it from this cancer survivor. Hydration is critical. The list of what goes sideways is massive, but it can be easily avoided. My secret weapon is a combination of commitment to having half my body weight in water per day, which is totally doable and easy when you plan for it, and to have electrolytes. And not just any electrolytes with hidden sugars and hide-and-seek ingredients. My go-to is LMNT, the zero sugar electrolyte drink mix that is redefining hydration. It is packed with all the good stuff our bodies need: sodium, potassium, magnesium. So it doesn't just hydrate, it supports nerve function and muscular contractions. How many drinks can you say do that? The best part is, if you're like me and water gets a little boring, the flavor options are endless. And honestly, delicious. I carry it with me wherever I go and I add it to my water. Enjoy meeting your hydration and electrolyte needs without any sugar, gluten, or artificial ingredients. This is the way that we restore and nourish our bodies that do so much for us. Oh, and get my special offer of a free sample pack with any purchase by visiting drinklmnt.com/LAMN. Enjoy, friends.
My parents were incredible role models, each in their own way, and also, you learn what you like and what you don't like as well. My father had a TV network in Mexico, and he was very much like truth to power, always very serious about it. It was very much a priority, always like this protecting sort of the truth, of the country. And in a long story short, he ended up exposing actually a Catholic priest that was a leader of the Catholic Church in Mexico that was abusing children.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he exposed it in live television, and the repercussions were crazy. And he had to leave, and he's been exiled ever since from Mexico.
Wow, I have the chills everywhere.
Yeah. And so when he left, I was 9 years old. And it was sort of like very sudden and just left, and I didn't really know what was going on. And meanwhile, my mom is the hardest woman I know. She works like crazy. She never stops. The older she gets, the more she works somehow. And she was always working, and she really sustained the family on her own. And so all 5 kids, she was working day and night. She builds companies, and she started a university, and she's this visionary that just does things and doesn't stop. And so even though I had these 2, incredible role models, each in their own way, it did mean a pretty lonely childhood.
Even
right?
with your 4 siblings.
Yeah, because I was the youngest, and the oldest were like, we were all kind of doing their thing. And so growing up, I was very, the nanny and this environment that my mom set up, which, helped her go work and do her thing, knowing that I was safe. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As a mother, I completely relate to what you're saying.
Right. And I can understand that, right? And I would have done the same. Like, and so there was this thing though where a combination. I think on the one hand, you need a lot more than just safety sometimes.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And on the other hand, I got this misconception of what the world was. I felt invincible. I felt, and in a little bit of a reckless way, to be honest. I was drinking a lot. I was going out a lot. I kind of had no limits.
Because you saw your parents as having no limits? Like,
no, they were just busy.
Yeah.
My father was busy being exiled, and
Yeah.
then my mother was busy working and
right. So
building
what
this empire.
what credited you with this feeling of invincibility?
Honestly, I think just the unrealistic Mexico City bubble that was very like Stepford Wivesy.
Got it.
And so when I decided to go study abroad, I get to Switzerland, and suddenly I was alone in the world, and I was traveling every weekend, and I was living this very, exotic life. And again, not a lot of limits. And it wasn't the same because I didn't have people to take care of me in Mexico. I didn't have a nanny and to make sure that I didn't fall or that something didn't happen to me. I was suddenly out into the world, but my mentality was the same.
Right.
And so I ended up in situations that were incredibly...
No guardrails.
Yeah, incredibly dangerous. I ended up having my very first sexual experience was a roofie experience in Europe in a club, and so suddenly I went from feeling completely protected and like invincible to real quick feeling the most unsafe ever. And so I think I got used to the feeling of unsafetyness, and it just became my state of being. And at that young age, especially with something like sexuality, it has repercussions that go way beyond the sex itself or even the physical body. Like a sexual abuse experience, especially being the first experience I had, it really defines who you are. Like it defines everything about you, how you relate to men, how you relate to yourself, how you relate to your body, your ability to feel self-love, your ability to feel safe, to trust others. It like spreads everywhere, right? And
yes.
And so it was a shock. It was like from feeling invincible to feeling just destroyed.
I mean, there are so many people listening to this who I know can relate to what you're talking about. And sexuality in and of itself is such a loaded topic, regardless of what your experience is, especially for women. We have such a complicated relationship with our sexuality societally. And that is, I'm not even just talking about like society here in the US. I'm talking about society globally.
Yeah.
Culturally. And it's woven into the fabric of how people live their lives, how they see themselves, how they are allowed to, in terms of what they internalize and embody, how they are allowed to express or own or experience their sexuality. So in your experience of this, and you so beautifully and vulnerably and courageously sharing your experience, what can you say you've learned as a result of having that experience?
Oh, so much. So much. I still learn. I keep learning. What followed after that, that happened like the first year I was abroad. And then I stayed abroad for 3 years. And then I sort of never went back to Mexico for that very reason, because it felt, in a way, it felt like taking steps backwards. Like I had to just start shaping what I thought the world was like, right? Not what I was told it was like. And so what followed was a lot of mental health issues. Like I started to have severe anxiety because I didn't tell anyone for a while. And I had panic attacks. I had depression. I would hear voices. And at that time also, like people didn't talk about mental health the way we talk about it now. It was, I had never even heard of it. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember Googling it, and just all that I would find was like schizophrenia, hospitalization, you know.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm losing it. Like, I'm losing my mind. And so really, you know, for years, I bought that story of like, oh, now I'm damaged. Now I'm damaged goods. And now I'm this person with anxiety. And now I'm fragile. And now I'm and like, I don't like sex. I'm this, like, all these labels that I started to attach myself with. And really, it gave me all the tools I needed in order to, years later, go on this deep exploration of who I am. Like, before all of that. Like, who was that girl?
This part I get so really uniquely interested in, because there are so many women who I've crossed paths with, you know, in my tenure of being in this, you know, line of work, particularly my expertise in working with women. And there are many women who just stay in the fight, flight, or freeze of it all, right? It's like they bury it. They deal with it on their own. They stay silent.
Yeah.
They are not interested in looking at or working through it or doing this deep dive. But the women that do, I'm always so fascinated. What was the turning point from I'm staying with this as I am versus I'm going to pivot towards trying to heal this in a different way?
It was a very specific turning point. I was about to marry the wrong guy.
Ooh, it's getting juicy in here, people. Okay, turn the volume up. We're getting into it.
I found myself months away from a planned and paid wedding. And thankfully, I found out that, you know, he was cheating and drugs and whatever, a whole bunch of stuff. And I had this moment of like, what are you gonna do? Like, I had this moment where I like split into two people. And there was me sitting on my bed with this information, haven't confronted him. And then there was this other me at the corner of the room watching me in bed being like, what's she gonna do? And there was this moment for a bit where it was so interesting because there was that part of me that was able to somehow have perspective, that was so excited about this moment. I was like, oh my God, like watching the movie. I was like, is she going to do it? Is she going to?
You're just riveted watching yourself make like an internal crisis
like
decision.
That. It was like
sliding doors.
Sliding doors. And so I was like, okay, this is happening. And I took off my ring and I was like, okay, like little steps. I called him, was a mess of a call, hung up, got in the car, drove to San Diego where my mom was, got out of the car, was like, I'm not getting married. I don't want to talk about it. Okay. And I kind of just started the process. And then once I sort of like the logistics of all that were settled, I went on I wanted to be alone. Really, I wanted to be alone. That's how it started. And I was like, I need to spend time alone. And I realized I had never really spent time alone like that. And I would always say, you know, oh, I love being in relationships and blah, 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 which I do. But I also hadn't really spent time alone. So I really sat with this, like, what do I want? And I realized that I had been so focused on this guy wanting to marry me that I hadn't actually asked myself ever, like, well, what do you want? Like, what do I want? And when this happened, I realized I didn't want to marry him. You know, it wasn't just because he cheated. No, like, I didn't want to marry him. But I never gave myself the space to even ask that question. It was just, so I started spending time alone. I started going deep introspection. I started asking myself really tough questions. I started experimenting with all kinds of things that would help me go into this deep introspective journey. Spent Christmas alone, New Year's alone, traveled, bought a one-way ticket to Madrid by myself. I was like, I don't know where I'm going from here. went for 2.5 months. And I really started to understand the role that I had, the role that I had played in the life that I had so far. I started to realize that life hadn't just happened to me. You know, it was like, okay. And
that you were an active co-creator in the process.
Active co-creator. Yes. And the first step of that was in recognizing that and then letting go of the anger and taking on the responsibility of like, okay. And then realizing the kinds of partners I had been choosing and why, and connecting all the dots all the way to childhood, right? All the way to, and it wasn't about like just understanding why I was how I was. Sometimes I didn't even have to understand. It was just the realization that I was choosing to continue with these patterns. I was choosing to, continue believing things like, oh, I'm just an anxious person, or I don't like sex, or like these things that had somehow become part of my identity. Even though they were
things that you weren't aware of, that you were operating under. So it was like putting a label or a mantra on yourself of, as an example, I don't like sex, where it was, well, actually, maybe I do like sex, but I definitely didn't like a particular experience or several experiences that I've had that have maybe, pushed me into thinking that I don't, but that's not actually necessarily my truth.
Exactly. I mean, I was limiting myself from anything ever changing in my life. And so I started to understand first energy and to meet energy. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like I had never heard of, I heard of it. I didn't believe it. I was very skeptical of it. And the more I started to understand how energy worked, and then how I was manipulating energy in my life, and then how, for example, a panic attack felt really similar to an energetic release. And I remember that first time I was like, well, I know this feeling. I've had these so many times in my life, except I just would take a Xanax and shut it down, right? And when I started to work, for example, with plant medicine at one point, and you go there to actually release these energetic blocks. I mean, if I wasn't in that, for example, space, I would have taken a Xanax because it felt like a panic attack. And so I started to understand my body, my energy, what was going on, and also understanding that I was completely disconnected to my body. Why I kept going back in time and being like, what was I thinking? Like in certain moments, for example, that I put up with a guy that treated me badly or that was physically abusive. And I was like, what was I thinking about me? And so I kept adding the about me afterwards.
Okay, so this is a logistical tool, people, right? Adding that at the end of a question, what is it about me in that particular moment that I made that choice?
Right. How did I justify that being okay? Like, what, like, instead of just what was I thinking and beating myself up like, oh, I'm such an idiot, why did I put myself there? It was like, what was I thinking about me? Oh, okay, I was thinking that I wasn't pretty, that I wasn't sexy enough, that I didn't really deserve this, that I was damaged, and so once I started to understand the stories that I had been telling myself, I was able to reevaluate them, right? And be like, well, do I really believe this? And do I believe it now? No. Okay, no, I don't believe this. No. And so I started to rewrite my story and to really take ownership over the fact that I had been in those situations, I had been in those relationships because I had also chosen those relationships because they were just matching the love that I had for myself. Like
that's powerful.
Yeah, like so they were loving me the same way I was loving me.
Yeah. So when you were going through this time period, was there any particular teacher you had, therapist or coach you had, a book you read? Like is there anything that you also credit with how you got to this place?
Yeah, so many. A lot of teachers, a lot of spiritual teachers and therapists and amazing people that I met along the years that would give me books as well. Louise Hay was incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah, she
I
is.
love her book so much.
Yeah.
Specifically the book, The Power is Within. I absolutely love that book. Then a book, Conversations with God.
That was actually, Conversations with God was actually my very first book that I ever read that really led me down the path. I'm just going to call it the path, and I'm going to just, if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, it's going to be a whole other podcast episode.
It was one of my, it was the first one for me too, that one and the Louise Hay one. I mean, it was, those books I remember, it was like, oh, okay, we're starting this. Like, it opened up something new. It made me question what I thought I knew. It made me unlearn and learn, and things started to make sense. And
you know, and I have to throw this in there. Personal anecdote of how I even found that book was because I was friends with someone who was married and had a baby, and the baby was very ill and ended up passing at 8 months old. And the day that the baby passed, the father said to the mother, "I'm not in love with you anymore, and I'm leaving."
My God.
And this woman, my friend, somehow landed on her feet and seemed like, yes, I've been through some shit, but I'm going to get through it. I am strong. I am capable. And I just marveled at her. And I remember one day asking her, how are you functioning? How are you putting one foot in front of the other? Like, my mind can't wrap around how you get out of bed in the morning. And she said, read this book. And that was sort of how I started. And, you know, obviously she had done so much more work than just reading that book, but it was her way of introducing me to the power of trust, deep trust. And, you know, we're getting to you being a trust architect. So I felt like I had to share that.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a powerful book. And it's a very good book to start.
It's a great, great starter set.
Friendly. The title is deceiving. It's so deceiving. A lot of people are like, oh no, I don't want a religious book. It's like, no.
Yeah.
This is not a religious book.
Yes.
But to your point, my immediate realization was that I didn't trust myself at all. And so I was going around the world asking for, like, basically wanting to trust others instead of trusting myself. And so I kept being disappointed. I kept being, you know, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
You can't just substitute your own trust for somebody else's trust, the same way you can't substitute self-love with someone else's love for you, right?
And it really, I mean, honestly, just goes back to, we are born so dependent on others. And it is the pathway from that moment on, right? That the separations that happen over and over and over again between you and other. And how that process goes determines how much trust you have, how much resilience you have, how much self-love and nurturing you're capable of, how much trust you do have, and all of that. And so it's a complex journey. And for each one of us, you know, it's unique, like snowflake or fingerprint unique.
Yeah. Trust is such a complicated thing, and also such a simple thing, and such a beautiful thing. And it's, I mean, the more I started going on that journey of like, what does it mean to trust myself?
Yes.
Like, what does that even mean?
And let's highlight the fact that, you know, this is something that I say all the time. I mean, everybody, I apologize in advance if you've heard me say this like a million times, but like, awareness is our superpower. Without it, we don't have choice around what's actually happening. And what you're talking about is a journey of first awakening or awareness to, oh, this is how I've been showing up to my life. This is how I've been showing up to my choices. This is how I've been showing up to what I'm tolerating and accepting versus and choosing for myself and allowing for myself. And it's from that point that we become empowered, that we see all, hopefully with the awareness, all of the other possibilities that are available to us, or at least starting to look for them.
Yeah, definitely.
And that is such a crux of the human experience, the human journey. But I wanted to circle back to something that you were talking about in terms of energy, because you talk about energy manipulation and you talk about being a trust architect. And I know those things go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. But for those who are listening that, may not have read Conversations with God and are not on this, path or journey, but are just curious, can you talk to, somebody that is, like a kindergartner going, what is this energy you speak of?
Yeah. It's fascinating. It really is. And it is just mind-blowing as well. But really, it's also very simple. It's pure basic science, right? Mm-hmm. Anything that has been created has energy, right? Because you need energy in order to create something. And so anything that has ever been created has energy. We were created, we have energy.
Yes.
If you want to think about it like what energy you have, well, then you can think about, the two energies that create you, right? Your mom and your dad, or there's a lot of different ways. But the point is, we are all energy. We are made up of energy, and we're surrounded and living amongst energy all the time.
And people at home, think about this as people at home. You may not be home. You may be in your car. I don't know where you are. But, think about like this, like we actually are made of electrical impulses, which is why, when you see like ER, oh God, does anybody watch ER anymore? They would be reruns. Anyway,
Scrubs.
Like they have these electrical paddles, right? That they put on your chest to bring you back. It's like boom, boom.
Yeah.
They're sending electricity into your body to get your heart pumping again. And we are made of electricity, energy, all of those things. So what we're talking about are things that you learned about, like, when do you start to learn about these things?
I mean, elementary
I don't
school.
remember the grade, but, and I don't think my kids have started learning it yet. So I think it's after
Middle
fifth
school.
grade. Yeah, I think it's middle school. Yes. That you actually start learning about, static energy and kinetic energy and how energy is neither created nor destroyed. And I'm not going to get scientific on you people.
For example,
yes.
I don't know why this is not a part of those classes, right? Like you're learning about energy.
Right.
Well, then let's start with the most basic thing. Like you are energy, right?
Yes. Energy and matter, right?
Yeah.
Like some basic principles.
And
here.
like you said, it cannot be destroyed. It can be manipulated. It can be transformed. And so if you think about that and you think, okay, so I am energy. All of this is energy. Everything that is created is energy. And energy can be destroyed, but it can be manipulated. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, okay, well then what do I have to play with, right? Like what is, just asking the question, like what is your relationship with energy? How are you using the energy in your life, either for you or against you?
That's right. So you can think about it in so many ways, just to give people examples, right? Are you using your energy to go work out? Right. I'm just making it really simple, right? Are you using your energy to relate with another human being? Are you using your energy for focus at work?
Right.
Are you using your energy here's a really good example also of like a shift of energy, a transformation of energy, right? Like maybe you're sort of feeling low energy and then all of a sudden, I have an even better one. Oh God, I'm sorry. I just got excited about my idea. You're working out and you're starting to feel really exhausted during your workout and you're listening to music and then all of a sudden a song that has a lot of energy for you comes on and then all of a sudden you've got extra gas in the tank, right? So those are just some examples I think that highlight what you're speaking of.
I mean, and the words you use have energy. And there's this beautiful experiment that honestly, and they actually do it in schools, I believe. But there's this Japanese book about it. I don't remember the name, but they basically take 3 glasses of water. Mm-hmm. right? And the guy like speaks to each of the glasses. And so to the first one, it says like loving words and positive affirmations and, you know, in a positive tone. The second one, it says like negative words and swear words and insults, angry energy. And the third one, he ignores. And then he analyzes the water molecules, how they change before and after in each one. And it's such a beautiful, simple book. And it's crazy how different the reaction is from one to the other. They do the same with rice. They do the same with, there's so many different things you can prove this, right? And so when you think about the fact that the water molecules that were spoken to lovingly and positive words were, you know, acting in a certain way that was like togetherness and great for the union. The other ones were like all spread out. And when you think about that, and then you think, okay, well, I'm 80% water or whatever percent, and I'm speaking words. And when I speak words, my entire body is feeling them. And then when I'm hearing words, I'm receiving that. And so you start to slowly realize that every single thing that you are doing is affecting your energy, your cells, your energy in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like you take part in this energy manipulation only when you're aware of it. Like, it's happening.
That's right.
The question is, are you aware of it? And can you then use it to your advantage? Can you be conscious of how you are manipulating energy or not? And another way to think about manipulation of energy is also your power of creation, right? You have the ability to create. And so it's about how you are doing it. What words do you use in your day-to-day? What content do you watch? What kind of music do you hear, to your point? What are the lyrics of the songs? What kinds of things do you surround yourself with? Artwork has energy. I mean, everything has energy that affects yours. And so for me, understanding that was very easy to understand it. It was hard to integrated into my life because it was so far from anything that I grew up knowing about. It was just not something that was taken into account at all. And so it required a lot of unlearning and a lot of very like specific observations on how I was using this energy in my life. And then I started to make friends with it. And then I started to, okay, well, if I can manipulate energy, like what can I manipulate it for, right? Like how can I work with different things? And so I started to learn about it more and more. And you suddenly start to live a life that happens for you because you are creating it, as opposed to just life happening and you're like, oh, why did this happen? What's happening? And you feel like life is just happening to you all the time and you can't do anything about it. It's like, no.
This is life by design.
It's life by design, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's really, to your point, very simple and also very complex.
Exactly.
And everything in life is balanced. So of course that makes sense to me that it would be both very simple and very complicated. But it's really, I think the point here is that there is a constant conversation, an energetic conversation that is happening within you, around you, toward you, away from you. And you could either be part of that conversation or not part of that conversation.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
You're making the point that the more involved you are in that conversation, the more agency you have around your experience when it comes to energy interplay.
Yeah. And, it's not that and I want to be very clear about this because in no way, shape, or form has my work in myself and with energy, and it hasn't taken away life's challenges. It hasn't taken away sadness. It hasn't taken away difficulty, but it has taken away suffering.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah. It suddenly, all of those challenges, difficulties, which have come in humongous ways, I feel like I have so many tools to help me not only go through it, but like grow through something. And when I grow through something, that thing becomes purposeful. And so as hard as it is, and as much as I can be like, oh God, like I don't want to go through this right now, I do always recognize the purposefulness of these challenges, how I come out truly stronger on the other side, if you take it that way, right?
So are you saying, just to the purpose of the people listening, are you saying that when you're going through something that typically you would have to suffer through, that you are tapping into the trust that this is happening for a purpose, and that is what relieves the sense of suffering?
Yeah. It relieves it. It doesn't take away sadness. It doesn't take away any of it. It's kind of like if you're in water and you're in the ocean and the waves are horrible, but you're like hanging on to something and you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna, okay, like trusting, going back to trust, right? Why did energy help me trust myself? Because it taught me about how much, what the active role that I was actually playing in my life. And so I started to, work with it as opposed to just against it or unconsciously. And so the more I did that, the more I trusted myself, the more I trusted my ability to understand energy, the more I trusted my intuition, because I could, I now was able to understand how I was relating to energy around me. And so that helped me immensely in developing this trust with myself first and foremost. And then I realized, because I thought, well, after trusting myself, then I'm going to go on this journey to trust others. But it's so funny. When you really trust yourself, that's all you need.
Correct.
You don't need to go around,
right.
trying to trust others. If you trust yourself, then you trust that at any given moment, you will know what to do with any given piece of information at any given time. If you are in tune with yourself, aligned with your truest version of yourself, and you trust that, then the world does become a safer place. But because you are trusting yourself, it's not about others, it's about you.
Yes. Well, here's a question that I have for you. And I know what my answer would be, but I'm curious what your answer would be in terms of, you say like what you say is energy and your thoughts are energy, right? And obviously we get to choose what our thoughts are. And we get to choose the things that we say. But oftentimes, people that are, let's say, in suffering find it really hard to choose a thought other than suffering.
Yeah.
And so when they're having those suffering thoughts, that is energy. What would you say to somebody that is in a suffering cycle, if you will, stuck in an energetic drain?
Yeah. I mean, it happens. For sure it happens. On the one hand, I think that's why it's so important to start to consider energetic health just as a maintenance of your life, the same way you consider any other kind of health maintenance, because it's really hard to try to apply it when you're in it. If you've never even applied it before, if you've never heard of it, if you've never, it's like if I tell you to meditate for the first time in the middle of a panic attack, like, no, if you don't have a practice, if you don't, it's near impossible. And so on the one hand, it's like, make this conversation and these things a part of your day to day, so that when you do need those tools, it's like they show up.
The muscle is already built and
there.
flexed.
They show up. You recognize feelings. Something hurts. You can tap into your body. Like you just get in tune with energy, and suddenly you have a lot more tools to work through things. Things don't disappear, but you have a lot more tools to work through them. And when you're in it, and I mean, I've been in those cycles, and, I think that there's a difference between feeling and suffering. And sometimes it's hard to know the difference. Other times it's necessary to suffer as well. I find myself sometimes fully aware of the fact that I am in this little cycle where I'm like, thinking of all these problems and things and pretending like I don't have the answers to things that I know I do, but I need to just linger in there a little bit.
In the suffering
spiral.
Yeah.
And then, but honestly, I know that when I'm done with it, when I'm like really fed up with myself, I'm like, okay, enough. Let's stop pretending like you don't have the answers. Right. And then I kind of get myself out of it. But I mean, breaking cycles is incredibly hard. And it really, it's just like it never gets easier. You just have to do it. I was stuck in the cycle for so long, and this anxiety cycle that I just was such a part of my essence. I didn't even know what I was without it. I didn't even know it was like different to me, you know?
Yeah.
It was such an embedded part of me. And it started with little things like stop saying that you're an anxious person. Stop saying that you are this, you are that. What if every day you gave yourself the benefit of the doubt of exploring who you are today? You know? Like,
I've said this before on this podcast, but I once worked with someone, Marissa Peer, who said, you know, your mind is always going to lie to you, so why not let it tell a better lie?
Yeah.
And I always loved that phrase. But, you know, I think it's also important to note that, you know, energy is sometimes a hard concept for people to grasp because it's not material, right? And it can seem new agey, or it can just seem, you know, far-fetched because you can't grab onto it, right? People are very much like, give me something solid that I can hold on to, and then I can make it real.
For sure.
But the truth of the matter is, like, when you plug something into the wall and it won't work unless it's plugged in, you believe that, right? Like,
well, even further, the doctors. I was talking to doctors the other day. There's this neurosurgeon, and I was like, oh, he's gonna like shut down my energy conversation in a second, right? Because I thought like, oh no, this is not gonna go well. And I was so shocked because, you know, I was talking to him and I said, well, and we were talking about ghosts. It wasn't even like, we were talking about like, do you believe in ghosts, right? And I said, well, you know, energy, you might not see it. I was like, but you recognize it in your line of work. I said, don't you recognize stress? Like, stress is fully recognized medically, like as a cause of something. They can measure stress. Stress is energy. Stress is invisible. You don't see stress, and yet, yeah, you recognize it, right?
absolutely.
And so we're not too far. Like, that's what I started realizing, that we're not too far off from what we think we are.
That's right. And energy is just as certain as matter.
Yeah.
And I think that there's such a beautiful space for people to get curious about the impact of energy and its certainty. And I say this because I constantly am working with energy and matter and how that shows up in your body.
Oh, yeah. My body changed. Physically changed.
I mean, it can't not, because we are inherently made of energy.
When I started letting go of things that were no longer serving me, more specifically partners that were toxic, and friendships that were not good, and weights that I should not have been taking care of.
Yeah, I mean, even just think about when you do like a spring cleaning and you get rid of things that aren't serving you or cluttering your space, aren't needed anymore, or you've outgrown them, how light you feel after doing that energetic dump.
I mean, definitely. And physically my body changed, my sizing changed, it affects everything, right? And so, I mean, honestly, when I look back at especially my years growing up and the challenges I faced and the suffering that I went through and all of these things, there is always a part of me now that recognizes how perfect everything has been as well.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think has been more, I mean, talking about books, like a little bit more spirituality wise. There's a book called Your Soul's Plan that blew my mind completely. And it asks the question, like, right? Like what if you had chosen everything that happened in your life, if you had chosen it before you were born, why would you have chosen that? You know, why would you have chosen that to happen and that to happen and that to happen? And when I really looked back and started to see like all of these things and seeing, obviously, when you're in the moment, it's so hard to understand the purpose of something bad. It's near impossible. And it's not the point, because you're supposed to also go through it and experience it, right? And feel it. And that's, I mean, I believe that's why we are here as human beings. It is to evolve and learn through experience, right?
Yeah, I always use the analogy of, you know, soldiers on the ground on the front lines that are in the battle. Things look very different through their eyes than it does from the, you know, the leaders that are up on high ground and can see the whole thing playing out. It looks completely different
and
through
they
their
trust.
eyes, right?
They trust. So it's that trusting, you know, that everything that has happened to me has been exactly what needed to happen to me. Mm-hmm. And I believe that entirely. And there are things that, you know, you'd be like, but why, how can you think that you wanted somebody to, you know, rape you, for example? Well, of course it's not like that. Right. But it's the fact that I do recognize the perfection of each of the obstacles that I have gone through and how they have all sort of come together in this perfect, unique, complicated, weird combination of elements that has led to today, right? To me being able to really focus my entire life on trust. I'm like, because when we come back to trust, you know, when I started doing this work and then I started analyzing trust in general, because I was like, it's so funny. I've never thought about trust outside of a romantic relationship. And so I was like, how does trust play a role in our life? I started to realize that around the world, across industries, one of the worst problems we were facing was a complete loss of trust. We were losing trust in governments, losing trust in technology, in brands, in your neighbors, losing trust across the board. And so what happens when a society doesn't trust? When there's no trust in a society, it can't be a community. There's no way it can be a community.
Right.
It's like everyone fend for themselves, isolation, animosity, people just going against each other because there is no trust that brings people together or that invites people to want to collaborate with one another or help each other out or invest in one another. And so we lose trust. We lose what keeps us together as human beings, right? And so when I started to see this and analyzing it in each of these realms of like industries, I was like, oh my goodness, like this is a major problem that no one's talking about. We're not talking about how trust is not being taken seriously. Yeah. And I think now, I mean, I'm glad to see, like, very recently, but finally people are starting to take it into account. For example, I'm working with companies that, you know, had whatever amount of users or followers or even an audience that they were wrongly calling a community. It's like, well, is it a community or is it just your audience? Because that's not the same thing, right? So how do you turn an audience into a community? How can you build trust? Or in these broken trust aspects, right? How can we rebuild this trust? Who is willing to really rebuild the trust amongst their ecosystem, within your company, within your family, within yourself? Like, this is a work that I am very passionate about, but that goes, you know, there's so many layers to it. And so one, like I said, it has to be trust yourself. If you don't trust yourself, we can fix the world. It's not going to be fixed.
Right. That's like, ground zero.
Ground zero. And then from there, we can start to work towards creating trust amongst groups of people, amongst communities, in relationships, like healing all of these broken relationships that, in my opinion, have led to an incredibly anxious world.
I mean, it's so funny because this is what I do in Soul Sway practice, the embodiment practice that I'm launching. It is about how do I repair the broken relationship of trust with myself, with my body.
Right. That's a huge one.
It is
huge one.
It is.
I spent years
ground zero.
apologizing to my body. Years.
It is ground zero. Well, I want to, because we've looked back, we've looked at the future, we've looked at how those, you know, the timeline of that and all of those themes have woven together, you know, intentionally, divine order, thank you very much, to bring us to where you are today. You are this trust architect. You are this energy magic, energy manipulation, you know, maverick. What is, like, as you face forward on the timeline, like, what is on the horizon? What is coming? What is next? What does the future hold?
So much. I'm so happy. So grateful, honestly, for the work that I've put into myself, because talk about trust, because I've been planting seeds and planting seeds and planting seeds and trusting and that it's all going to make sense eventually. And this year, finally, it all started to flower and to make sense. And next year, you know, it just continues. I mean, I'm, as a trust architect, working with, like I said, companies to help them build trust, whether it's internally or externally. Usually it's a bit of both. but most importantly, with individuals, working with people into, okay, how do you start in this process of trusting yourself? How do you start in this process of discovering energy, of building a relationship with energy and with your manipulation of it, which really is such a beautiful process of having people just meet themselves, right? It's like, are you ready to meet yourself in your most essential, like, truest version of yourself? And the thing is, it's a hard process because once you do, it's a commitment. Like, if you're ready to meet that version of yourself, then you have to be committed to taking action in your life to make sure that that is the person that's living. Right? And so the next year and this next phase is really about working with people for that. Like, working with people to help them discover their own magic, to help them develop these tools in their own life, in order to be able to slowly but surely rebuild trust in the world.
I mean, worthy cause, worthy, massive undertaking.
Yeah, massive.
But God bless that you're doing it. It needs it. The world needs it. All right. So I'm going to pose to you the final question that we pose to everybody on this podcast. So imagining that you have a mirror in front of you and you get to have a moment where all of the external gaze dissolves. Any expectation of you, any judgment of you, none of it holds any weight. This is your moment to acknowledge and validate yourself, given the story that you've just told us of all the things, all of the challenges, and all of the rewards that you and all the yous that you've have been through. This is your moment to say, look at me now, between you and you alone. What is it that is reflected back?
There's this photo that I have of myself when I was like 8 years old, probably. Super intense photo of just me, like literally just me looking at the camera, but like such a gaze. And whenever I see that photo, I always think, oh, she knew. she knew what was up. Like she knew all of this. Somehow between there and here, we forgot. But she knew. And when I looked in the mirror right now, it was her looking back, just being like,
just giving you a look.
Yeah, it was
that all-knowing.
It was just this recognizing. You know, it's like, there you are.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
I remember you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see you. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was so nice.
Well, we are about to wrap it up here, but I really want to make sure that anybody that's listening to this
at home,
that wants to at home, on a spaceship, wherever you are, how can they be in touch with you? How can they be part of your world? I have to sing that every time. I don't know.
I'm very easy to find. You can find me on socials at Ivana Maria. You can also find my app Story Place. It's free. It's a social journaling app. You can share stories, read other people's stories and journals.
God, we love that.
If you want to work on your trust building, you can find me on Hidden Broccoli. Is the name of my
I have to ask
endeavor.
Why Hidden Broccoli? What a unique name. I can't end without knowing.
Yeah, it's a great name because usually when I talk to people about energy, work, magic, all these things, it's really about finding a way for all of this information to feel safe enough for you to listen to it and to really learn it and to process it. And so it's really an art of hiding the broccoli in so many different ways and speaking whatever language is comfortable for you.
My mom brain totally gets what you're talking about, because if I don't hide the broccoli, my kid is not going to get the nutrients.
And the information is the same. And I think for so long, the information has been attached to a religion or to a group of something or to I'm interested in giving this information in a completely...
to you in a way that is digestible, receivable, maybe even delicious.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. What a clever name.
Thank you.
Holy, so I'll never forget it either. I will be screaming out about hidden broccoli all over the place.
Love it.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
What a magical conversation.
Loved it. Yeah, it really was.
I can't wait for this to go out on the airwaves.
Yeah.
To your spaceship and to your car and your home. Yeah. Thank you, honey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And for everybody that is tuning in, we will see you next time. Adios, friends. Join us for Look at Me Now, wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to share, like, and subscribe.